Hi, this is Mike 1013 for FlopTurnRiver. Today I want to talk about quickly identifying fish at the table. It's important to identify fish because they're the major source of profit at the poker table. While there are a lot of strategies to use against regs, either to exploit their tendencies or prevent yourself from being exploited for your tendencies, the amount of money to be gained by employing such strategies is limited. That's not to say they're not important. It's very important to know how to play against regs. But it's even more important to identify and exploit fish as much as possible. Fish play much worse than regs do. They make more mistakes, and consequently, there's more money to be won from a fish than from a reg. The easiest way to identify if a player is a fish is if you have a long history of playing against him or you have a large sample size of stats against him. But even if you've just sat down at the table or he's just sat down at the table, there are a couple of things to look for to help you identify the fish as quickly as possible so that you can begin exploiting him right away. First of all, players who open limp are almost always fish. While there are a few players who will try limp re-raising or having balanced limp raise, limp call, limp fold ranges, these players are very unusual. Most of the time, a player who open limps is not trying to pull off some tricky play. He's just a bad player with a bad hand. Another thing to look out for is people who sit with weird stack sizes at the table. Most regulars will have auto rebuy on, so they'll always buy up to the table maximum, which is usually 100 big blinds, but it can be different. When you see people sitting with 57 big blinds or 73 big blinds, they're most likely to be fish. This doesn't hold true if the player has the minimum or close to the minimum buy-in for the table. In that case, they might very well be a competent short stacker and not a fish. Finally, even if you don't have a long history playing against a player, there's one stat that I find lets you know something about him very quickly, and often as little as 10 hands, and that's the gap between his VPIP and PFR. A player who's playing something like 10-10 or 40-30 over a few hands might well just be running hot or cold. But solid players who run hot don't have stats like 80-20 or 78-0. A player who has such a large gap between their VPIP and PFR are almost always fish, even over a very small sample size. So once you identify players who are very likely to be fish, what should you do about it? Well, if you haven't taken a seat at the table yet, sit immediately and try to get position on such a player. These are the players around whom games run. It's the best situation in poker to have position on a fish. You should try to get in this situation as often as possible. Also, you can begin raising their limps pretty wide, even without any other information about their post-flop tendencies. Players who open limp are typically making such a big mistake pre-flop that you can get away with raising them quite a bit and still have the best of it, even without knowing much about how they play. This is especially powerful if you have position on them. Against a single limper whom you suspect of being a fish, you can probably raise any pair, any ace, any 2 Broadway, and any suited connector, and probably even a few other hands. Finally, when you see a player or more than one player at the table who displays the tendencies that we've been talking about, be sure to pay attention to them, to what their stack-off ranges are, to their tendencies. You'll be playing more pots against the fish than against the other regulars at the table, simply by virtue of the fact that fish enter more pots than regulars do. Moreover, fish tend to play more straightforwardly than regs, and they also play much, much worse than regs. So your ability to exploit them will be greater than your ability to exploit regs. Thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you can use these tips to start winning money from fish immediately. Later.